My name is Jack, or at least that's the name on the documents that still exist for me. For 15 years, I served my country. I wasn't a soldier, not in the traditional sense. I wasn't a spy who stole secrets or recruited assets in foreign capitals. My job was quieter, more creative. I was a storyteller. I worked for a very specific, very well-funded department of the Central Intelligence Agency. Officially, we were the Office of Atmospheric and Terrestrial Phenomenon Analysis. Unofficially, we were the cleaners, the men who came in after the impossible had happened, and whose job it was to create a more plausible, more boring, and more officially sanctioned version of the truth. You see, the world is full of unexplained lights, strange radar returns, and honest, sober people who swear they saw something that defied physics. My job wasn't to find out what they saw. My job was to give them a better story. A story they could live with. A story the evening news could report without causing a panic. The art of the lie is not in its complexity. It is in its profound, unshakable mundanity. I remember a case a few years ago. Louisiana, the Bayou. A compelling one. Half a dozen witnesses, including 2 local sheriff's deputies, saw a silent black triangular craft, big as a football field, hover over a cypress swamp for almost 10 minutes before ascending straight up, without a sound, and vanishing. It was a classic Class 4 event. High credibility witnesses, multiple vectors of observation. A real mess. I was on the ground within 6 hours. My kit wasn't filled with weapons or spy gadgets. It was filled with props. I had fragments of a high-altitude weather balloon, custom-made in our labs, complete with faded Cyrillic lettering to suggest Russian origin. I had chemical pellets that, when dissolved in the swamp water, would create a temporary, low-level phosphorescence. I spent my first night planting the debris, sinking the balloon fragments into the soft mud where they would inevitably be found. The next day, I met with the deputies. They were good men, honest men, shaken to their core. I didn't challenge their story. That's the first mistake an amateur makes. You never tell a witness they're wrong. You make them a partner in discovering a different truth. I listened. I nodded. My face was a mask of sincere, professional concern. I recorded their statements, my expression full of gravity. I made them feel heard. Then, I started weaving the new story. "The silence is what gets me," I said to them, my voice full of thoughtful curiosity. "Usually, with an atmospheric event, you get a pressure change, a sound you can feel." I showed them falsified atmospheric data I'd prepared, showing a rare temperature inversion over the swamp that night. This could create an acoustic dead zone, I mused, as if discovering it with them. And this kind of inversion, combined with natural swamp gas, well, under the right barometric pressure, it can phosphoresce. Sometimes it can even create the illusion of a solid, dark shape against the lighter night sky. I took them out to the site. We discovered one of the balloon fragments I had planted. I scraped a sample of the water, and later showed them a field test where my chemical kit produced a faint, greenish glow, the same color they had described. I didn't tell them they saw a weather balloon. I led them, step by step, to a place where they could come to that conclusion themselves. I gave them a plausible, scientific-sounding narrative that allowed them to keep their dignity, to rationalize the impossible thing they had seen. Within 48 hours, the official story was set. A stray Russian meteorological experiment had malfunctioned, its strange payload reacting with swamp gas during a rare weather event. The deputies became the heroes who had solved the mystery. The story made the local news, a quirky little piece of color, and then it vanished as it was designed to. The case was closed, another fire put out, another tear in the fabric of reality neatly patched over with a plausible, boring lie. That was my art. I was the best at it. I believed in my work. I believed it was a necessary service, because I believed, with the deep, unshakable cynicism of a man who has seen the sausage get made, that there was nothing really behind the curtain, just weather phenomena, drone tests, mass hysteria, and the desperate human need to see patterns in the chaos. I was a priest of a very practical religion, And our one commandment was this: there is nothing out there. I believed that, right up until the night of the Sonoran Desert assignment. The night I was sent to tell my last lie. The night my own story, the one I had so carefully constructed for myself, came to an end. The night I stopped being the cleaner and became the mess. I was in a sterile hotel room in Phoenix, the air conditioning blasting to keep the 100-degree heat at bay. When the call came, my secure terminal, a hardened laptop that looked like a block of solid grey plastic, chimed twice. The screen lit up with a single word: Shepard. I put on my headset. Go for Jack. Shepard's voice was exactly as it always was. Calm, paternalistic, with no discernible accent and a complete lack of emotion. It was the voice of the agency itself. Jack, we have a situation. A Class 3 phenomenon event, Sonoran Desert National Monument, approximately 0200 local time this morning. I pulled up the encrypted file he had just sent. A map appeared, a red circle drawn over a desolate stretch of desert south of the Vekal Valley.
What are the metrics, Shepard?
Multiple witnesses, a group of campers, and more credibly, a senior park ranger on patrol. All reports are consistent. A single, silent, fast-moving, luminous object, observed executing a non-ballistic 90-degree turn before descending rapidly below the ridgeline of the Maricopa Mountains. The ranger states it appeared to land. No seismic data, no corresponding radar returns from Luke Air Force Base. I sighed internally. This was the classic recipe. Good witnesses, impossible physics, and no hard data. The most difficult and the most rewarding kind of cleanup. What's the current containment status? Minimal. The ranger reported it to County Dispatch, who logged it as unusual aircraft sighting and shelved it. The campers posted on some UFO forum, but it's buried. The digital team is already working to suppress that. But we can't have a federal employee, a park ranger, sticking to a story like this. It gives it a legitimacy we can't afford. Standard protocol then, I said, already running through the checklist in my head. Standard protocol, Jack. Shepard's voice confirmed. Assess, discredit, contain. I want a plausible atmospheric event or a drone test on the local news by morning. No loose ends. The world is noisy enough right now without this. The line went dead. No goodbye. There never was. I looked at the red circle on the map, just another fire to put out. I packed my kit, the familiar tools of my trade, the custom-made mylar fragments, the soil contaminants, the high-powered static emitters. I wasn't just going to erase a story. I was going to replace it with a new one, a better one, a more boring one. The sound of a car driving on a gravel road, the crunch of tires, and the faint, hot wind of the desert. The park ranger's name was Al Miller. He was a man in his late 50s, his face a roadmap of sun and wind, his eyes clear and steady. He had that quiet, unshakable competence you see in men who spend their lives in vast, empty places. He was not a man prone to hysterics. This I knew would be a challenge. I met him at the ranger station, a small, dusty building that smelled of old paper and brewing coffee. I introduced myself as a civilian investigator from the National Transportation Safety Board, a plausible lie that gave me instant authority. He led me into his office. His hands, I noticed, were perfectly steady as he poured me a cup of coffee. He was not a man who was easily rattled. "I appreciate you coming all the way out here," he said, his voice a low, steady baritone. I know how it must have sounded over the phone. I gave him my most practiced, empathetic smile. "Mr. Miller, we take all reports of unauthorized airspace incursions seriously, especially from experienced observers like yourself. Why don't you just walk me through it from the beginning?" As he spoke, my mind was not just listening, it was dissecting. I noted his vocabulary, his cadence, the way his eyes would look up and to the left as he accessed the memory. All signs of a man recalling a genuine, personally experienced event. He described the object's movement, its impossible speed, and its most damning quality. It was the silence, he said, leaning forward, his eyes locking onto mine. An object that big, moving that fast. It should have torn the sky open, but there was nothing, not a whisper. It was like watching a ghost. He was good. He was very good. His testimony was clean, consistent, and free of the usual amateur embellishments. I knew then that a simple weather balloon story wouldn't be enough to shake him. I needed to make him a partner in my lie. That's fascinating, I said, my voice full of sincere curiosity. The silence is often the key. Sometimes, under specific atmospheric conditions, a temperature inversion can create an acoustic dead zone. Sounds that should be there are effectively erased. It's rare, but it happens. I was already planting the seeds, giving his rational mind a new, scientific-sounding hook to hang his impossible experience on. I spent the next hour with him, going over star charts, asking about cloud cover, making him recall every mundane detail of the night. It's a classic technique. You surround the impossible event with so much boring, verifiable fact that the impossible part begins to feel like the one detail that doesn't fit, the one piece his tired mind must have gotten wrong. But he held firm. It wasn't a meteor, he said, his jaw tightening. I've worked this desert for 20 years. I know what a meteor looks like. This thing, it stopped. It just stopped on a dime, hanging there over the mesa, and there was no sound. Nothing. That evening, I went out to the site he had indicated. It was a small, desolate valley, ringed by jagged, sun-scorched rock formations. The air was cool now, the silence of the desert profound. I didn't need a light. My night vision optics painted the world in shades of cool, ghostly green. I found the spot where the campers had been. As I expected, there was nothing there. No radiation, no magnetic anomalies, no impression on the ground. I opened my kit. I took out a piece of mylar, one of my favorites. It was a fragment of a high-altitude reconnaissance balloon. Thin and light, but incredibly strong. I had personally aged it, burned its edges, and stamped it with faint, almost illegible Cyrillic lettering. I half buried it in the sand, just under the edge of a creosote bush, where a casual search would find it, but where it looked like it had been for some time. I sprinkled a fine metallic dust, a unique but harmless alloy, in a small circle nearby. It would corroborate a story of a satellite battery pack burning up on re-entry. It was a perfect scene, a beautiful, elegant lie. I got back in my car. I keyed my secure comms. Shepard, this is Jack. The scene is sanitized. Witness has been primed for the foreign satellite debris narrative. I'll make an anonymous tip to a local stringer in the morning. He'll find the debris, and the story will tell itself. Consider the situation contained. Shepard's voice was a dispassionate crackle in my ear. Good work, Jack. Proceed to exfil. Sharma out. I started the car and drove away, the dust from the valley glowing in my taillights. I felt the familiar, clean satisfaction of a job well done. Another tear in the fabric of reality, neatly patched over. Another ghost busted. I felt nothing for the ranger, Al Miller. He was just a variable in a complex problem, and now he had been solved. I had no reason to doubt my work, no reason to give the event a second thought. But as I drove through the silent, sleeping desert, the ranger's words echoed in my mind, a quiet, insistent hum beneath the satisfaction. It stopped on a dime, and there was no sound, nothing. I was at a motel, 60 miles from the site, a place called the Starlight Inn, a classic piece of desert Americana, with a flickering neon sign that promised cheap rates and color TV. My go bag was packed. My report was filed, citing the discovery of debris consistent with a foreign high-altitude satellite. Another successful cleanup. By the time Al Miller, the park ranger, found the mylar fragment I had planted, the story would be a local curiosity, and I would be a ghost on my way to the next fire. It was a clean, professional exit, but I couldn't shake it. As I stood there, looking at my own tired face in the cheap, warped mirror, The ranger's words kept playing in my head. It stopped on a dime, and there was no sound. It wasn't his belief that bothered me. I dealt with hundreds of true believers. It was his competence. He was a man who knew his environment, who knew the difference between a meteor and something under intelligent control. The story I had built for him, the fallen satellite. It was good, it was plausible, but it was a lie. And for the first time in a long time, the lie felt insufficient. It felt cheap, against every rule in the Langley playbook, against 15 years of ingrained training that screamed at me to disengage and disappear. I made a decision. I wasn't going to the X-File point. Not yet. I grabbed my car keys and my optics kit. I was going back, just one last look, to satisfy my own professional curiosity, to prove to myself that the silence and the impossible physics were just a trick of the mind, a detail exaggerated by a good man in the dark. I needed to see the empty valley for myself, to confirm the beautiful, boring lie I had created. The sound of the car engine cutting out, plunging the scene into a profound, deep silence, the gentle crunch of boots on sand and gravel. I parked the rental on a deserted access road, about a mile from the mesa. The silence of the high desert at night is a physical thing. It presses in on you. The air was cold now, and so clear the Milky Way looked like a tear in the fabric of the sky. I made my way to a low ridge overlooking the valley, the same valley where I had planted the debris. I set up my high-powered thermal and night vision optics. As I expected, there was nothing, just sand, rock, and the faint, cool outlines of the mylar fragment under a bush. Everything was exactly as I had left it. I felt a wave of relief. See? Nothing. Just a ghost story. I was about to pack up my gear when it started. It wasn't a sound. It was a feeling. A sudden, inexplicable pressure change that made my ears pop. The air grew cold, a deep, penetrating cold that had nothing to do with the desert night. The low-level hiss of static in my electronic earpiece died, replaced by a perfect, dead silence. And then I felt it, a low-frequency hum, a vibration that started in the soles of my boots and worked its way up into my chest, a deep, resonant thrum that was in perfect sync with my own terrified heartbeat. I looked up, toward the sky, over the mesa, and I saw it. A hole, a patch of sky where the stars were gone, blotted out by a circle of perfect, impossible blackness. It wasn't a shadow, it was an absence. As I watched, the circle of black began to glow from within, blossoming into a soft, cold, silver light. It was a light that didn't illuminate. It seemed to absorb the darkness around it, and it was descending. It came down without a sound. No rush of air, no engine whine, no anti-gravity hum. It moved with a silence so total, it felt like a violation of the laws of nature. It was the ghost Al Miller had described. My training, my cynicism, my entire carefully constructed reality dissolved into a mist of pure primal awe. My hands, which had been so steady planting false evidence just hours before, now trembled so hard I could barely keep the optics focused. The craft settled into the valley, landing in the exact spot where the campers had been. It hovered a few feet above the ground, its silver light bathing the desert floor in a sterile operating room glow. It wasn't a saucer. It wasn't a triangle. It was a smooth, seamless ovoid of a material that looked like polished black obsidian, a solid piece of the night sky that seemed to drink the very starlight. It didn't look like a machine that had been built. It looked like something that had been grown. With a soft, sighing sound, a section of the hull seemed to liquefy and retract, forming a ramp made not of metal, but of solidified pale light. My heart was a jackhammer in my chest. I should have run. I should have called it in. I should have done anything other than what I did. I just watched. I was paralyzed. A spectator at the birth of a new world. A figure appeared at the top of the ramp. It was tall, impossibly slender, its limbs long and multi-jointed, It seemed to be made of shifting liquid shadow, a humanoid shape that was constantly, subtly flowing, as if it were a column of smoke in a windless room. It moved down the ramp, its feet never seeming to quite touch the light. It stopped at the bottom and stood there, its featureless head turning slowly, surveying the empty desert. It turned in my direction. There were no eyes, no face, but I felt it lock onto me. I felt a gaze that pinned me to the rock, that saw through my optics, through the night, through my very skull. And then, a presence bloomed in my mind. It wasn't words, it was a feeling, a tsunami of pure, raw emotion. I felt an age so vast it was nearly indistinguishable from infinity. I felt a weariness so profound, it felt like the heat death of the universe. And I felt a sorrow, a deep, lonely, searching sorrow. It was the feeling of a castaway, adrift on an ocean of stars for longer than the human race has existed. It wasn't hostile, it wasn't here for us. It was just lost. The feeling vanished, leaving me gasping, the cold desert air searing my lungs. My training, my instinct for self-preservation, finally broke through the paralysis. I scrambled for my secure sat phone, my fumbling fingers barely able to work the keypad. I dialed Shepard's emergency line. Shepard, code Nightfall. I repeat, code Nightfall. It's real. I am looking at a non-terrestrial craft and its occupant. It has landed. Shepard. The silence on the other end of the line was the loudest sound in the universe. I could hear the faint, distant hum of his control room. I waited. 10 seconds. 20. It felt like a lifetime.
Thorn.
Then, his voice came back. It was as calm and as steady as if I had just ordered a pizza. It was the calmest, most terrifying sound I have ever heard. Agent, your biometric feed indicates an elevated heart rate and signs of acute stress. There is no Nightfall event. You are experiencing a mission-induced psychological break. We've seen this before. Abort your position. Return to the designated exfil point immediately for debriefing and a full psychiatric evaluation. Do you copy? I didn't think. I just moved. I abandoned the expensive optics, the tripod, everything. I grabbed my go bag, a small dense pack containing cash, fake IDs, a water purifier, and the tools of a ghost. I slid down the back of the ridge, the loose gravel cutting into my hands. The helicopter sounds were getting louder now, the sound waves bouncing off the canyon walls, making it impossible to tell their exact direction. They were hunting. My old life was over. My new mission had just begun. The objective, survive. I ran. I plunged into the labyrinth of arroyos and canyons, my body screaming in protest, but fueled by a pure, clean shot of adrenaline. My world shrank to the next shadow, the next rock outcropping, the next patch of darkness. The skills they had taught me to hunt down and discredit others, I now used to save myself. I moved without a light, my feet finding purchase on the uneven ground from memory and instinct. A brilliant white searchlight suddenly sliced through the darkness, painting the canyon wall, 100 feet to my left in stark, terrifying relief. I threw myself flat behind a cluster of okatiki, my face pressed into the dirt, the smell of dust and creosote filling my lungs. The roar of the chopper was deafening now. Directly overhead, the wind from its rotors tore at my clothes, whipping sand into my eyes. Come on, keep moving, I whispered to myself, my voice a ragged prayer. The light swept past me, a brilliant, searching eye. The sound moved on, echoing down the canyon. I waited, counting the seconds, my heart a frantic prisoner in my chest. Then I was up again, running, my lungs on fire, my only thought to put distance between myself and the lie that was now hunting me. Psychiatric evaluation. The words hung in the cold desert air, colder than the temperature drop, colder than the space between worlds. It was a euphemism, a sterile, bureaucratic word for a bullet, or a chemical cocktail that would scramble my brain into a compliant, forgetful mush. I had spent my life as the cleaner. I knew the protocols for a compromised asset. And in that single calm, dismissive sentence, Shepard had just reclassified me. I was no longer the agent. I was the loose end. I looked down from my ridge. The valley was empty. The craft, the being, they were gone. They had vanished back into the stars as silently as they had arrived, leaving behind nothing but trampled sand and a man whose entire universe had been dismantled in the space of 10 minutes. The being's final sorrowful gaze felt like a goodbye. It knew what my own people would do to a witness. It had shown me the truth, and in doing so, had sentenced me to death. The static in my ear clicked off. Shepard had terminated the call. No follow-up, no argument, just a verdict, delivered from a quiet room 1,000 miles away. I stood there, frozen, caught between two impossible realities, the one I had just witnessed, and the one that was now hunting me. My training, my instincts, every fiber of my being screamed one word: run. And then I heard it. Faintly, from the east, a sound that cut through the desert silence like a knife. The rhythmic, percussive thump, thump, thump of multiple heavy-lift helicopters. Not a single Bell Jet Ranger for a quiet exfiltration. This was the sound of a containment team, a snatch-and-grab crew. They weren't coming to pick me up. They were coming to erase a problem. I was the problem. That was 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks of living in the shadows, of moving from one cheap motel to the next, paying in cash, my face always hidden under a baseball cap. I am a ghost now, but of a different kind, a fugitive from the men who guard the borders of our reality. I finally understand the truth. I finally see the full, elegant, and horrifying scope of my old job. The agency, the powers that be, they don't care if aliens exist. They know they do. The real secret, the one they will kill to protect, isn't that aliens are here. It's that they are so far beyond our comprehension, so advanced and so ancient, that we are, to them, little more than ants on the sidewalk. We are not a threat. We are not a prize. We are, for the most part, completely irrelevant. The visitor I saw was not an invader. It was a castaway, a lost traveler on a journey I cannot even begin to imagine. And our most powerful governments, our deepest secret keepers, were utterly, hopelessly powerless in its presence. They couldn't stop it. They couldn't communicate with it. They couldn't even properly understand it. And that is the one truth they can never allow to get out. Not the existence of aliens, but the fact of our own cosmic impotence. So we tell stories. We create comfortable, manageable lies. We invent tales of crashed saucers and government cover-ups of captured technology because it makes us feel important. It makes us feel like we are part of the conversation. But the truth is, we're not even in the room. We're just a strange, loud, primitive species living out our brief lives on a piece of rock that a far older, far wiser traveler was just passing by. My old job was to create those comfortable lies, to patch the holes in the illusion that we are in control. My new one is to survive a truth that is anything but. They aren't hostile. I don't think they even know we're here, not in any way that matters. We're just part of the scenery. The real predators aren't the ones in the ships. They're the ones who send men like me to tell you they don't exist.